My name is Victoria Quinn. My blood ran cold when my father-in-law mocked me, calling me street scum right in the middle of the dinner table. The guests around us witnessed my humiliation. I slowly rose, whispering, "Enjoy your meal. You just cut off your company's only source of income." For 3 long years, my father-in-law had looked down on me and called me useless. Tonight, he finally said it out loud in front of everyone who mattered. His voice cut across the table like a blade. The guests froze. Forks paused in midair, eyes locked on me. The silence was deafening. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply stood up, delivered those calm words, and turned my back on the table. My heels echoed as I walked out, leaving nothing but shocked whispers behind me. None of them knew what was coming next. This was far from over. If you enjoy intense family drama and satisfying revenge stories that will keep you hooked until the very end, give this video a thumbs up right now, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. What would you do if your own father-in-law humiliated you and called you useless in front of everyone? Your stories might be featured in our next video. The next morning, Victoria Quinn drove through the quiet streets of downtown Denver toward her own apartment. Sunlight reflected off the glass buildings as she parked in the underground garage and took the elevator up to the 15th floor. She set her keys on the counter and opened her laptop on the dining table without wasting time. Victoria and Brandon had been married for 3 years. They maintained their own place in the city but drove out to the family estate most weekends at the invitation of Harold and Susan. The arrangement worked for a while until the comments started. From the very first family gathering, Harold had treated her like an outsider who had somehow tricked his son into marriage. He never missed a chance to point out that she came from a modest background and worked as an ordinary engineer before their wedding. Those early remarks still lingered in her mind. Harold once told Brandon in front of her that she brought nothing useful to the table and would only hold the family back. Victoria never argued back then. She simply smiled politely and changed the subject. Over time, she learned to keep her professional life completely separate from the Quinn family circle. She logged into the secure server for Apex energy storage. New messages filled her inbox. The latest report showed strong quarterly numbers and confirmed several key contracts moving forward. Victoria reviewed the attached spreadsheets carefully. The technology her team developed had become essential for large-scale renewable projects across the region. Few people outside the industry understood how critical those storage solutions had grown. A soft vibration interrupted her focus. Brandon's name appeared on the phone screen. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you got home okay?" Brandon asked. His voice carried a mix of concern and hesitation. "I'm fine," Victoria replied evenly. "Just catching up on some work." There was a short pause on the line. Last night was rough. Dad went too far. Mom kept saying he was under pressure because of the company situation, but still. Victoria leaned back in her chair and stared out the window toward the distant mountains. He made his feelings clear in front of everyone. "I heard him," Brandon sighed. "I know. I should have spoken up sooner. It's just, he built everything from the ground up. Quinn Renewables is his whole life. The board has been nervous lately about the storage contracts. If those fall through, the whole operation could face serious trouble." She listened without interrupting. Brandon continued, his tone uncertain. "Maybe we can talk to him together later. Smooth things over before it gets worse." Victoria glanced at the open report on her screen. The data told a different story. Apex Energy Storage now supplied the majority of the advanced battery systems that kept Quinn Renewables competitive. Without those systems, the solar and wind projects would lose efficiency and funding fast. "I understand the pressure he's under," she said. "But some things can't be smoothed over with a conversation." Brandon stayed quiet for a moment. "You're right. I just don't want this to blow up into something bigger. We're family." The call ended shortly after. Victoria closed the laptop and stood up. She walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and looked at the city skyline spreading below. The weekend stretched ahead with unfinished business. Harold's public dismissal had crossed a line that changed everything. She knew exactly what steps to take next, but she would handle them carefully and on her own terms. 2 days later, the phone rang while Victoria sat at her desk reviewing quarterly projections. Susan Quinn's voice came through the line, sharp and direct. "Victoria, we need to talk about Friday night. Harold is still upset about how you left the table. He feels disrespected in his own home in front of important guests. Victoria kept her tone steady. Susan, I heard what he said. Everyone did. Susan exhaled loudly. You know he's under enormous strain right now. The big storage contract with the State Utility Board expires at the end of the month. Without a reliable supplier, Quinn Renewables could lose millions in funding. The board members have been calling him non-stop, asking for updates. He barely slept last night. Victoria listened as Susan continued. Harold built this company from a small solar installation business 20 years ago. He poured everything into it. If those battery systems fail to deliver on time, the entire renewable portfolio collapses. Banks are already tightening credit lines because of the uncertainty. The conversation stretched for several minutes. Susan listed every recent setback the company faced: delayed shipments from overseas partners, rising material costs, and investor meetings that ended with more questions than answers. She emphasized how much the family had sacrificed to keep the business afloat. Victoria remained quiet until Susan finished. I understand the pressure, but public comments like that don't solve problems. Susan's voice softened slightly. We're family. Victoria, Harold didn't mean to embarrass you in front of everyone. He just wants what's best for Brandon and the legacy we've created together. Maybe you could come out to the house tomorrow and clear the air. It would mean a lot to him. Before Victoria could respond, the front door opened. Brandon walked in carrying his work bag. He had driven straight from the office after a long morning of marketing strategy sessions. He set the bag down and mouthed, "Who is it?" when he saw her on the phone. Victoria covered the speaker for a second. Your mother. Brandon nodded and waited until she ended the call. Once the phone was down, he crossed the room and sat beside her. She called you too. Dad's been pacing around the house all weekend. He keeps muttering about the contract deadline. Victoria turned her chair to face him. She told me the company could be in real trouble if the storage deal falls through. Brandon rubbed his forehead. It's worse than she let on. The board met privately yesterday. They're worried the current battery supplier might pull out because of payment delays. Dad's been trying to negotiate extensions, but the terms keep getting stricter. He paused and looked at her directly. I've been thinking about what happened Friday. I should have said something right then. It wasn't fair to let him speak to you that way. I've always tried to stay neutral, but I see now how much it affects you. Victoria studied his expression, but the hesitation from their earlier phone call had faded. Brandon continued. Dad built Quinn Renewables on his own vision. He doesn't like admitting when he needs outside help. But the facts are clear. The advanced storage technology is the only thing keeping the projects competitive right now. They talked for nearly an hour about the years of tension. Brandon admitted the family gatherings had grown more strained each time Harold made passing remarks about Victoria's background. He described how he felt caught between loyalty to his father and the life they were building together. Victoria nodded occasionally, but kept her own thoughts measured. When Brandon finished, she opened her laptop again. The screen showed the current stock performance of Quinn Renewables. Share prices had dipped another 2 points since Friday. She scrolled through the latest filings and noted the volume of institutional trading. Brandon watched her quietly. You're looking at the numbers. She closed the tab without comment, just staying informed. The afternoon light shifted across the apartment as they continued their conversation. Brandon stood up and prepared a simple lunch for both of them. They ate at the kitchen counter, discussing lighter topics for a while. Yet the underlying concern about the company deadline remained in the air. Victoria cleared the plates afterward and returned to her desk. She opened a new spreadsheet and began entering preliminary figures. The columns represented potential acquisition costs and projected synergies if a larger entity stepped in to stabilize the supply chain. She worked methodically, comparing market data with internal projections she had access to through her separate professional network. Brandon left the room to take a work call of his own. Victoria continued entering data until the spreadsheet filled several pages. Each row reinforced the same conclusion she had reached earlier. The situation at Quinn Renewables had reached a tipping point, and the next few days would decide its future. She saved the file under a secure folder and shut the laptop. The rest of Sunday passed with quiet domestic routines. Brandon reviewed campaign materials at the dining table while Victoria handled a few routine emails. Neither brought up the family situation again that evening, yet both knew the coming week would force decisions that could not be delayed. That Friday evening, the dining room at the Quinn estate filled with the clink of silverware and low conversation. 12 guests sat around the long mahogany table under the crystal chandelier. Harold presided at the head, Susan to his right, while Victoria and Brandon occupied seats midway down the left side. The main course had just been served when Harold raised his glass. He looked directly at Victoria and spoke loud enough for the entire table to hear. To family and real contributions. Some people sit at this table expecting everything while offering nothing in return. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Susan placed a hand on Harold's arm. "Dear, perhaps we can discuss business matters later." Harold shook off her touch. "No, let's be honest tonight. Victoria here has been part of this family for 3 years, yet she still acts like an outsider. She contributes nothing to Quinn Renewables. Nothing at all. Just another useless addition who drains resources instead of building them." Victoria set her fork down slowly. The room grew quiet. One guest cleared his throat while another stared at his plate. Harold continued, his voice gaining strength. "I've said it before in private, but tonight I'll say it clearly. You came from nowhere with no real prospects. You're street scum pretending to belong among people who actually create value." "Brandon deserves better than someone who brings zero to the table." Susan tried to intervene again. "Harold, the guests don't need to hear this." "Victoria has always been respectful." "Respectful," Harold laughed sharply. "She barely speaks at these dinners. Sits there like she's above it all. The company is facing its biggest crisis in years, and she offers nothing. No ideas, no connections, no support, just dead weight." Several guests exchanged glances. A woman across the table looked down at her wine glass. Brandon stared at his father, his face pale. But no words came out. Victoria pushed her chair back and stood. She met Harold's eyes without raising her voice. "Mr. Quinn, you've made your position very clear tonight." She turned to the table. "Enjoy your meal. You just cut off your company's only source of income." The words landed in perfect silence. No one moved. Victoria walked toward the wide doorway, her steps measured on the hardwood floor. She did not look back. The sound of her heels faded down the hallway until the front door clicked shut behind her. Inside the dining room, the silence held for several long seconds. Then whispers started. One guest leaned toward his wife and murmured something. Another checked his watch as if calculating how soon he could leave. Susan stood up quickly. "I'll go speak with her. This has gone too far." Harold waved a hand dismissively. "Let her go. She'll cool off and come back apologizing like always. The girl has no backbone." Brandon finally spoke, his voice low. "Dad, that was unnecessary." In front of everyone, Harold turned to his son. "Necessary. I've watched you defend her for 3 years. When will you see she adds no value to this family or this company? Quinn Renewables needs strength right now, not charity cases." Susan returned a minute later, her face tight. "She's already driving away." The valet said she took her car without another word. The dinner continued, but the energy had shifted. Conversations stayed polite yet strained. Guests avoided eye contact with Harold. One older investor mentioned needing to check on another commitment and left early. Others followed shortly after, offering brief thanks as they departed. Harold remained at the head of the table, finishing his wine. Good riddance to the drama. Tomorrow we focus on real business. The storage contract won't save itself. Susan sat back down but said little. She glanced toward the empty doorway several times. Brandon pushed his plate away untouched. He excused himself and walked out to the terrace, pulling out his phone but then putting it away again without calling. The staff cleared the table quietly. The grand dining room felt larger and colder once most guests had gone. Harold poured himself another drink and stared at the empty seat where Victoria had sat. He muttered something about teaching respect, but the words carried less conviction than before. Outside, the Denver night air had turned crisp. Cars started in the circular driveway as the remaining guests made their exits. The evening that began as a celebration of family and business success had ended in public fracture. No one at the table that night realized how deeply those few minutes would alter the future of Quinn Renewables and the family that built it. The morning after the dinner, Victoria Quinn arrived at the headquarters of Apex Energy Storage early. She parked in her reserved spot on the executive level and took the private elevator to the top floor. The building hummed with the usual activity of a Monday startup pushing hard on deadlines. She settled into her corner office overlooking the Denver tech corridor. Her assistant had already placed fresh coffee and the latest financial reports on the desk. Victoria opened her secure laptop and initiated a conference call with her legal team and chief financial officer. "Status on the Quinn Renewables position?" she said once everyone joined. The CFO responded immediately. "We've accumulated 12% of their outstanding shares over the last 6 months through various holding entities. The latest dip after Friday gives us an opportunity to push higher without drawing attention." The lead attorney added details. "The contracts for the battery storage systems are ironclad. Apex supplies 68% of the critical components for their current wind and solar projects. If we withhold renewal notices, the entire portfolio risks default on state grants." Victoria reviewed the numbers on screen. "Prepare the acquisition package. We move this week. Also draft the board summons for Harold Quinn. He needs to be here tomorrow morning." Her team confirmed the timeline. Victoria ended the call and stood up to pace the office. She had built Apex from a small research lab into the leading provider of advanced energy storage solutions in the Rocky Mountain region. Few outside her inner circle knew she held majority control, or that the company had quietly become indispensable to larger renewable firms like Quinn Renewables. A new message alert appeared. It was from the banking contact handling Quinn's credit lines. The email detailed urgent concerns about upcoming payments and the need for confirmed storage supply agreements. Victoria forwarded it to her CFO with instructions to coordinate. She spent the next hours in back-to-back meetings, first with the engineering director discussing improvements to the latest battery prototype, then with the sales lead reviewing pipeline deals that could expand Apex's market share. Each discussion reinforced the strategic advantage her technology provided. Mid-morning, her phone vibrated with a call from Brandon. She answered while reviewing a contract draft. "Are you okay after last night?" he asked. His voice still carried traces of the previous evening's tension. "I'm handling it," Victoria replied. "How is everything at the house?" Brandon hesitated. "Dad is furious. He spent the morning yelling about respect and family loyalty. Mom tried to calm him, but he's convinced you overreacted. He's already talking about cutting ties if you don't apologize." Victoria listened without interrupting. Brandon continued. "I told him we need to focus on the company issues. The board is meeting internally today about the storage contract. They're worried about the renewal terms." She glanced at the clock. "The contract situation is more serious than he realizes." Brandon sighed. "I know you're upset and you have every right to be. But Dad built this from nothing. If the company fails, a lot of people lose their jobs." Victoria kept her response measured. "Jobs and livelihoods matter. That's why decisions need to be based on facts, not personal attacks." They spoke for several more minutes. Brandon described the atmosphere at the family office where Harold had called an emergency staff meeting. Employees whispered about the dinner incident that had somehow leaked through social circles. Victoria noted the details but offered no specific plan. After the call, she returned to her preparations. She instructed her assistant to block out the entire next day for a critical executive session. The legal team sent over the initial summons document for review. Victoria approved the language and requested it be delivered through formal channels. Lunch came from the building cafeteria. She ate at her desk while studying market analyses of Quinn Renewables stock. The price continued its gradual decline. Institutional investors had begun reducing positions, citing supply chain risks. Victoria cross-referenced this data with Apex's internal projections, showing how their technology could stabilize the projects if properly integrated under new leadership. The afternoon brought more operational reviews. She met with the research team to approve funding for next-generation storage prototypes. Discussions covered efficiency gains and cost reductions that would position Apex even stronger in the renewable sector. By late afternoon, the acquisition framework had taken clearer shape. Victoria reviewed the final draft with her CFO. The numbers showed potential for significant synergies once control shifted. She authorized the next round of share purchases to be executed at market open the following day. As the sun began to set over the mountains, Victoria closed her laptop. The day had been productive. Every action moved the pieces into position for the changes ahead. Harold's words from the dinner table had accelerated a process that was already in motion. The coming hours would test loyalties across the Quinn family and the company they controlled. She drove home through the evening traffic thinking about the next steps. The weekend drama had clarified priorities in ways no board meeting ever could. Monday morning arrived with clear skies over Denver. Harold Quinn received the formal summons at 8:30. The document requested his presence at Apex Energy Storage headquarters for an urgent meeting regarding the storage supply contract. He dressed in his usual dark suit and drove across town, assuming it was another negotiation session with a vendor. He arrived at the modern glass building and was escorted to a large conference room on the executive floor. The table was set with water pitchers and notepads. 2 lawyers sat on one side while a financial advisor reviewed documents on a laptop. Harold took the seat offered to him and checked his watch. "Let's get this started," he said. "I have a full day at Quinn Renewables." Fickle. The door opened again. Victoria Quinn walked in carrying a thin folder. She wore a tailored navy blazer and moved with calm authority. Harold's expression changed immediately. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Victoria sat at the head of the table. She placed the folder in front of her and looked directly at him. "Mr. Quinn, this meeting concerns the future of your company." Harold leaned forward. "If this is about Friday night, I don't have time for personal matters. Send your complaints through Brandon." Victoria opened the folder. "This isn't personal. Apex Energy Storage has been supplying the critical battery systems that keep Quinn Renewables operational. Without our technology, your wind and solar projects would have lost efficiency months ago." Harold frowned. "I know who supplies the components. What's your point?" Victoria slid a document across the table. "I am the majority owner and CEO of Apex Energy Storage." The room went still. Harold stared at the corporate registration papers showing Victoria's name and ownership percentage. His face turned red as he scanned the pages. "That's impossible," he muttered. "You've been a low-level engineer. You don't have the capital or the experience for something like this." Victoria remained composed. "I started Apex 4 years ago with seed funding from private investors. The company grew because we developed superior storage solutions. Quinn Renewables became one of our largest clients without realizing the connection." Harold pushed the papers away. "This is some kind of joke. Brandon put you up to this." At that moment, Brandon entered the room quietly and took a seat near the door. He nodded to Victoria but said nothing. Victoria continued. "Apex currently holds contracts that represent 68% of your storage needs. The upcoming renewal was set to expire soon. Without renewal, your state grants and bank financing would collapse." Harold's hands clenched on the table. "You're bluffing. We have other suppliers." One of the lawyers spoke up. "The alternative suppliers cannot match the efficiency or scale. Our analysis shows Quinn Renewables would face default within 90 days without Apex technology." Harold pulled out his phone. "Susan needs to hear this nonsense." He dialed quickly and put the call on speaker. Susan's voice filled the room. "Harold, what's happening? The summons mentioned a contract meeting." Harold cut in. "Victoria claims she's running the storage company. She's trying to say she controls our supply chain." Susan sounded confused. "Victoria, that can't be right. Let me speak to her." Victoria leaned toward the phone. "Susan, this is a formal business discussion. I will not discuss family matters here." Susan tried again. "We can resolve this at home. Harold is under stress. Come back to the house and we'll talk like family." Victoria shook her head. The time for family talks passed on Friday. Apex is prepared to exercise its options. We can purchase controlling interest in Quinn Renewables through the open market and existing holdings. Harold slammed his hand on the table. "You wouldn't dare. This company is my life's work." Victoria met his gaze steadily. "Your public statements made it clear I bring no value. Apex has brought enormous value to your projects. Now the structure will reflect that reality. You will be asked to step down as chairman effective immediately once the acquisition completes." Brandon finally spoke. "Dad, the numbers don't lie. The board has been warning about the supply risks for months. Harold ignored his son and stared at Victoria. You hid this the entire time, pretending to be useless while positioning yourself to take everything. Victoria closed the folder. I built my company separately to avoid exactly the kind of interference I experienced at family gatherings. The acquisition will stabilize Quinn Renewables with proper integration. Jobs will be protected under new leadership. Susan tried one more time on the phone. Victoria, please, think of Brandon. Victoria ended the call politely but firmly. This meeting is concluded for now. The formal offer will be delivered to the Quinn Renewables board this afternoon. Harold stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. This isn't over. He stormed out of the conference room. Brandon remained seated for a moment longer, looking between Victoria and the empty doorway. The lawyers began gathering their documents in silence. Victoria stayed at the head of the table reviewing the next set of papers. The reveal had shifted the balance completely. Harold now understood the full extent of the changes coming to his company and his family. Later that same Monday afternoon, the boardroom at Quinn Renewables headquarters filled with tension. 7 board members sat around the polished oak table, while legal counsel reviewed documents on a large screen. Harold Quinn arrived last, still visibly agitated from the morning meeting. He took his usual seat at the head and called the session to order. We have urgent supply chain issues to address, he began. The storage contract renewal needs immediate attention. Before anyone could respond, the door opened. Victoria Quinn entered, accompanied by 2 attorneys and a financial advisor. Brandon followed closely behind her. The board members exchanged surprised glances as Victoria took a seat near the center of the table. Harold's face hardened. This is a private board meeting. You have no standing here. One of Victoria's attorneys spoke calmly. Ms. Quinn represents Apex Energy Storage, which holds significant influence over the company's operations. We have formal business to present. Victoria placed a thick binder on the table. As of this afternoon, Apex has acquired controlling interest in Quinn Renewables through market purchases and strategic holdings. We now own 51% of the voting shares. Murmurs spread around the room. Several board members leaned forward to examine the share transfer documents. Harold grabbed the binder and flipped through the pages rapidly. This is outrageous, he said, his voice rising. You can't just buy my company overnight. The lead board member, an older investor named Thomas Reed, cleared his throat. The filings are legitimate. The transaction complied with all SEC regulations and our bylaws. We need to vote on the leadership changes. Victoria addressed the room directly. The acquisition will integrate Apex's technology fully into Quinn Renewables. This will secure all current contracts and open new funding opportunities. However, the current chairman must step down to allow proper restructuring. Harold stood up abruptly. You think you can walk in here and fire me after everything I've built? This company is my name, my legacy. Victoria met his eyes without flinching. Harold, the board has reviewed the performance data. The supply risks have been documented for months. Continuing under the same leadership would jeopardize hundreds of jobs and millions in investments. Brandon spoke for the first time, his voice steady. I support the transition. The facts show we need new direction to survive. Harold turned to his son in disbelief. You're siding with her against your own father. Brandon nodded slowly. This isn't personal anymore. The company needs stability. Victoria's expertise in storage systems is what kept us afloat this long. The board proceeded with the vote. One by one, the members raised their hands in favor of accepting the acquisition and removing Harold as chairman and CEO. The motion passed unanimously, with only Harold abstaining. Victoria addressed the group once the vote concluded. Effective immediately, Harold Quinn is relieved of all executive duties. A transition team will be appointed to ensure continuity. All employees will retain their positions during the integration period. Harold's face turned deep red. He pointed across the table. You planned this from the beginning? Hiding behind your little company while smiling at family dinners? This is betrayal. Victoria remained composed. The decisions were based on business reality. Public comments at the dinner table simply accelerated the timeline. Legal counsel presented the formal termination papers. Harold refused to sign at first, but the attorneys explained the terms were non-negotiable under the company's governing documents in Colorado corporate law. He eventually signed with a heavy hand, muttering about lawsuits and family disloyalty. The meeting ended shortly after. Board members filed out quietly, offering brief nods to Victoria as they left. Brandon stayed behind with her while Harold gathered his personal items from the chairman's office down the hall. Harold emerged carrying a small box of belongings. He stopped in front of Victoria one last time. "You may have the company today, but you won't have a family. This is finished." He walked out without waiting for a response. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the corridor until the elevator doors closed. Victoria turned to Brandon. "The transition starts tomorrow. We need to notify the banks and major clients by end of day." Brandon looked tired but resolute. "I know. I'll help with the internal communications." The late afternoon sun streamed through the boardroom windows as they reviewed the next steps. The power structure at Quinn Renewables had shifted completely in a single afternoon. What began as a family dinner disagreement had resulted in a full corporate takeover, executed through legal and financial channels. The following Tuesday brought finality to the changes at Quinn Renewables. Victoria Quinn sat in her new office at the company headquarters reviewing the transition documents. The integration team had worked through the night to ensure smooth operations. Bank notifications had been sent, and major clients received updates about the leadership change. Harold Quinn spent the morning at the family estate packing personal items from his home office. The large house in the upscale Denver neighborhood suddenly felt too big. Susan Quinn watched from the doorway as he placed framed awards into boxes. "You didn't have to push it this far," Susan said quietly. "We could have found another way." Harold didn't look up. "She took everything. My company, my position, my reputation, all because of one dinner." Susan crossed her arms. The board voted. "The banks approved the deal. Fighting it now will only cost more money we don't have." News of the takeover spread quickly through the industry circles. Several former board members called Harold to express sympathy, but none offered support. The stock price stabilized after the announcement as investors gained confidence in the new technology integration. By afternoon, Harold received a call from his lawyer. The bank had frozen several lines of credit tied to his personal guarantees. The family home carried a substantial mortgage that required his executive income to service. Without the chairman's salary, payments would soon become impossible. Victoria and Brandon met with the transition committee that afternoon. They approved new contracts that locked in Apex's technology at favorable terms. Employee meetings were scheduled to address concerns about job security. Most workers expressed relief that the supply issues had been resolved. Harold and Susan sat down with their financial advisor later that day. The numbers painted a difficult picture. The loss of income combined with existing debts meant they could no longer afford the large estate. The bank had already started the foreclosure process on the second property they owned downtown. "We'll have to downsize," the advisor explained. "Move to a smaller place in the suburbs, perhaps one of the developments outside the city limits." Susan looked at her husband. "This is what happens when pride gets in the way. You pushed Victoria away and now the family is broken." Harold stared at the spreadsheet. She hid who she really was, pretended to be nothing while planning this. Brandon called Victoria that evening from his car. "Dad and Mom are meeting with lawyers tomorrow. The house situation is getting serious." Victoria listened as she reviewed final reports. "The acquisition was done legally. The company is stronger now." "I know," Brandon replied. "I stood by you because it was the right decision for the business. But watching my parents face this is harder than I expected." The next few weeks brought concrete changes. Harold Quinn no longer received invitations to industry events. Former colleagues avoided his calls. He started looking for consulting work, but opportunities were limited for someone recently removed from his own company. Susan began sorting through belongings in preparation for the move. She found old family photos from happier times, but set them aside without comment. The couple spoke less as the reality of their new circumstances settled in. Victoria focused on growing the combined company. New projects launched with improved efficiency. Investors who had pulled back earlier returned with fresh capital. Brandon took on a larger role in marketing the integrated solutions. The Quinn family ties severed completely. No holiday invitations were sent. No calls came from the older generation. Victoria and Brandon built their life around the successful business and their own future plans. Months later, Harold and Susan lived in a modest townhouse in a Denver suburb. Harold worked part-time at a small solar installation firm. The pay covered basic expenses, but nothing like their previous lifestyle. Susan took a job at a local community center to help with finances. One evening, Harold sat on the small patio looking at the distant mountains. "I never saw it coming. Called her useless and lost everything." Susan joined him. "We judged her by what we saw on the surface, never asked what she was building on her own." Their words carried the weight of consequences that could not be undone. The family that once gathered for grand dinners now lived separate lives with no path to reconciliation. Victoria Quinn's decision to protect her company's interests had reshaped not only a business but an entire family dynamic. The events proved that underestimating someone based on appearances could lead to rapid and irreversible change. Success in business and life often comes from recognizing true value rather than surface judgments. Pride without humility carries a high price in the real world where actions have lasting financial and personal repercussions.